McLaughlin's kick is right down the middle.
From 55.
The NFL is a definition of a week-to-week league. Week 3 was certainly eventful, and today we're going to be talking about what we learned from week 3 of this 2025 NFL season. It was a blast. We saw a lot of blocked field goal attempts. We saw 6 teams advance to 3-0 records and 6 now winless teams that are now 0-3. Among those teams that are 3-0, the Buffalo Bills, the Philadelphia Eagles, who won in an amazing fashion against the Rams, the Colts with Daniel Jones, who has continued to really be arguably the most surprising team this season, the 49ers, the Buccaneers, and the Chargers. With Justin Herbert, who is really having a case already. I know it's early to be a potential MVP candidate. Those teams have been the best in the league so far, but some of the winless teams this year, I think the most surprising one is the Houston Texans, who dropped the divisional game against the Jacksonville Jaguars, losing 17-10. Then the Giants lost to the Chiefs, the Dolphins lost on Thursday night, the Jets, the Saints, and the Titans. Man, like I like to say a lot of times, it's still just week 3, still a lot of football to be played, still 14 weeks left, but for those teams that are winless, time is of the essence, and you got to get some dubs in the win column, or it's going to be a long year. And for those undefeated teams, we expect the 4 out of those 6 teams at least to be legit playoff contenders. The Colts and the 49ers, I think more so the Colts have been more surprising than the 49ers. We know what they're capable of. They went to the Super Bowl 2 times in the past 6 years, but we saw a lot of crazy games. And I think we also saw Caleb Williams have his best performance of his career in a dominant fashion, absolutely destroying the Cowboys, who I believe have the absolute worst defense in the league. They've given up 92 points in 3 games this year. It's awful. We're going to talk about them later when I talk about their game individually, but it was just awful to see. It's like an inevitable feeling that you feel like the Cowboys are going to allow an explosive play. And Matt Eberflus, as being the former head coach in Chicago and now defensive coordinator for the Cowboys, it's like he was gift wrapping intentionally the Bears to get their first win of the year. But I digress on that. You saw the Panthers blow out the Falcons, winning 30-0. That was a surprising game. The Packers dropping a game against the Browns. That was wild to see. Chiefs finally getting their first win of the year, but I still remain wildly unimpressed with their performance, but they were still able to beat a team that they're better than the New York Giants. And then we finished off on Monday Night Football with the Lions and Ravens game. Just a lot of really high-level football being played, guys, and I think that we're starting to see teams develop into a way that they're finding and honing in their identities, but I think that we're also seeing a lot of the league too still trying to find out who they are. I talked about the Cowboys. They have a great offense, but their defense is shite. Teams like the Chargers continue to hone into their system with year 2 under Jim Harbaugh as a head coach. The Seahawks won in dominant fashion against the Saints. The Vikings cooked the Bengals, winning 48-10 in a battle between backups. And like I said, the Bills, they beat the Dolphins again, with Josh Allen getting his 14th win of his career against Miami. So a lot of great football to be talked about throughout this video. But with that being said though, guys, before we get further into recapping NFL Week 3 and talking about what we learned, make sure that you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and X at SwaggyRuss, and on TikTok at SwaggyRuss02 for shorts, reels, content, and a lot of things of that nature. Stay tuned also for the day after this is being posted. We'll be talking about the NFL Power Rankings going into NFL Week 4, and also stay tuned soon for my NBA season preview series that we'll have starting as the NBA season starts next month. A lot of great content on the way, guys, but with all that being said, let's talk about what we learned from NFL Week 3. So Week 3 started with a matchup in the AFC East between the Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins. And the Bills won this game 31-21, but I will say Miami came out and threw the first punch, had a good first drive off of the kick return. Then Ollie Gordon had a rushing touchdown that helped set the tone, but the Bills were able to climb back. First to a receiving touchdown to Dalton Kincaid. Also, other receivers that were involved at a high level for Buffalo was Khalil Shakir. Running game wise, James Cook just continues to be, in my opinion, one of the best running backs in the league. And really, besides, of course, their quarterback Josh Allen being the biggest offensive weapon to this team in Buffalo, as James Cook had 19 carries for 108 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Josh Allen, you know, he did Josh Allen things, completing 22 out of his 28 passing attempts for 213 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. And like I said, those touchdowns going to Dalton Kincaid, Khalil Shakir, and Jackson Hawes. Just a really complete performance from the Bills, but I will say the Dolphins, they did hang around in the game, and ultimately, even in the fourth quarter, they had a chance to come back and even take the lead and win their first game of the year, but Tua Tagovailoa had a costly interception. And really, I know from a stat perspective and really from a completion percentage perspective, Tua's stats weren't bad, but if you look further into it, from a average yards per throw, or at least per completion, Tua only averaged 4.3 yards per completion. I mean, the offense necessarily wasn't the most explosive. Tyreek Hill, though, he did have a receiving touchdown, having 5 receptions for 49 receiving yards in that touchdown, and Jalen Waddle also added in a receiving touchdown too. But for this Dolphins team, like I said, this was a very winnable game for them, and it was only a 10-point game. It wasn't a blowout or anything like that, like a lot of people probably would have predicted. But regardless of the fact and regardless of the matter, they're 0-3 right now, and And you got to ask yourself, when are they going to get their first dub? They play against the Jets, who are also 0-3. They play them in week 4. So hopefully that can be an opportunity for them to get their first dub. And then they'll have a matchup against the Panthers in week 5. But it's going to get tougher again in week 6 as the Dolphins are going to have to play against the Chargers. So Miami, when is your first win going to come? But for the Bills, though, this is a game that we thought was going to be chalk anyways. And ultimately, overall, they had a solid performance. Maybe a little bit of a questionable performance from the run stopping of the defense as well, too. Like I said, Ollie Gordon, rookie running back for the Dolphins, had a pretty solid game and was able to be physical in the running game. And Devon Achane had 12 carries for 62 rushing yards, averaging 5.2 yards per carry. So I guess maybe from a run stopping scenario, that's something of course you want to improve if you're Buffalo. And also you got to think about Ed Oliver and Matt Milano. They were both missing in this game, and hopefully they'll be back soon. But overall, Buffalo still looks to be one of the best teams in the NFL, and they got the win and are still 3-0 and undefeated on the season. And Miami is still searching for their first win for this 2025 NFL season. We had a total of 4 different backups playing in NFL Week 3, and in this game we saw 2 backups play in the Minnesota Vikings and Cincinnati Bengals matchup. But the Vikings absolutely put on the Cincinnati Bengals, winning 48-10. And oh my goodness, that Vikings defense was in full effect. Isaiah Rodgers, he had 2 touchdowns, one off of a forced fumble that he had, and then one off of an interception. And mind you, both of those came in the first half, guys. This Vikings defense was absolutely devastating. Jake Browning played awful. I mean, we really don't even have to go through the stats, but he threw 2 picks, and that one pick 6 that he threw to Isaiah Rodgers offensively. Carson Wentz was able to just manage the game and be solid in his offense in his first game this year with JJ McCarthy being out. And he completed 14 out of his 20 passing attempts for 173 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns. Jordan Mason was hooping in this game, had 16 carries for 116 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Justin Jefferson had 5 receptions for 75 receiving yards, and TJ Hawkinson had a receiving touchdown, as well as Josh Oliver. He also added in a receiving touchdown too as well too. So certainly a lot of dominance in this game from the Vikings, from the Bengals. This is what a lot of fans feared once they saw Joe Burrow get injured in that game last week against the Jaguars with that toe injury. If this is a sign of things to come, this might be a long season in Cincinnati, especially with Joe out 3 months. And one question that I think that we should start thinking about right now is, will they potentially trade Trey Hendrickson before the trade deadline? Because I know a team that needs a lot of pass rush, and we'll talk about them soon too, trust me. But if the Bengals are going to trend downwards and have a bad year and miss the playoffs for a 3rd consecutive season, not only will we have questions about Zach Taylor returning next year, even though I think it'll be unfair to fire him because with Joe Burrow being out, but we'll have questions about if they'll punt this year and how bad this team could be. But this is one game. We'll see what happens. Jake Browning can certainly respond next week, but it's going to be tough playing against the Denver Broncos. But the Vikings made a statement in this game, almost dropping 50 points. Always a hard thing to do in the NFL, but they were able to do that and terrorized the Bengals in this game, getting a great W after losing to the Falcons in week 2. This AFC South battle between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Houston Texans was kind of hard to watch. I don't know if you want to say it was because of the defenses played great or the offenses were just that inept, but the Jacksonville Jaguars won this game, winning 17-10. And if you want to talk about a control standpoint, I guess the Jacksonville Jaguars had control for most of this game, even though the Texans had a lot of opportunities to come back and win this game, especially after Trevor Lawrence threw that 4th quarter interception. The play immediately after, CJ Stroud found Nico Collins for a receiving touchdown, and Nico Collins played great in this game. On his 11 targets, he had 8 receptions for 104 receiving yards and a touchdown, but they're able to get nothing in the running game, only having a total of 87 rushing yards, with CJ Stroud having 22 of that. Christian Kirk played his first game of the season, wasn't really able to get much going as he had 3 receptions only for 25 receiving yards and 39 receiving yards from Dalton Schultz. I mean, this Texans offense, it just looks very, I don't even know if stagnant is the word, but there's no creativity. And I know this is Nick Haley's first season as an offensive coordinator and a play caller, so there's going to be growing pains and things of that nature too as well too. But you're 0-3 now, you're winless right now on the season, and you're behind teams like a Jacksonville Jaguars that you lost to in this game, but now the Indianapolis Colts, who moved on to a 3-0 record after defeating the Tennessee Titans. So hopefully the Texans, they get their first win in week 4, because if not, there's going to be even more bigger panic there. But for the Jacksonville Jaguars, like I said, it was a good win for them after losing to the Bengals in week 2. Trevor Lawrence didn't necessarily have the greatest game, but their offense was able to make plays when necessary, and their running game wasn't necessarily the greatest from a statistical standpoint, but they were able to get key plays in and get 2 rushing touchdowns, one from Bashir Tootin in the first half, who had a rushing touchdown, and then in the second half, which essentially was the game sealing touchdown from a Travis Etienne Jr., who had 16 carries for 56 rushing yards and a touchdown in the game. So that was a good thing for them. Brenton Strange had 6 receptions for 61 receiving yards. Brian Thomas Jr. didn't necessarily have a lot of receptions, but had 2 receptions for 55 receiving yards. And Naomi Brown got hurt in the game, but Jacksonville, they got a solid dub. I think that they're going to be one of the more improved teams this year, but for the Texans, man, like I said, it's urgency. You got to get a win in week 4 against the Titans. That should be hopefully a get-right game for them. But even with the Titans, as they lost to the Colts in week 3, they still played competitive games in week 1 and week 2, more so in week 1 against the Broncos, but even only losing to the Rams by 2 scores in week 2, that might not necessarily be a slouch of a game. So the Texans got to get things going right. The Jaguars, they got a good win over their AFC South rival. Transitioning to 2 other AFC South teams between the Indianapolis Colts and the Tennessee Titans, and the Colts won this game by a dub, winning 41-20 to move on to a 3-0 record, and now the Tennessee Titans are 0-3. Man, the Colts, they finally punted in this game for the first time of the season in the second quarter. But I will say one thing, man, this offense and this team overall is just clicking. Daniel Jones completing 18 out of his 25 passing attempts for 228 passing yards and a touchdown, also having 4 carries for 27 rushing yards too. Jonathan Taylor continues to dominate. He's having shades and remnants of that season that he had in 2021 when he was the rushing leader in the NFL. And in this game, he had 17 carries for 102 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns, averaging 6 yards carry. Their defense forced Cam Ward to throw a pick 6 early in the game. And I will say Cam Ward, he didn't necessarily have the worst game after that. Completed 23 out of his 38 passing attempts for 219 passing yards, a touchdown and an interception. Tony Pollard had a touchdown, and Amenor had a receiving touchdown too. But I mean, the Colts really controlled this game. You want to talk about the Colts' weapons, which I think has also been a strong suit and really has helped utilize Daniel Jones even more in the Shane Steichen offense. Michael Pittman Jr. having 6 receptions for 73 receiving yards and a touchdown. Alec Pierce had 4 receptions for 67 receiving yards, and Tyler Warren didn't necessarily have the greatest game, had 3 receptions for 38 receiving yards too. But this offense was able to hold things down and just make key plays because their defense really was devastating against the Tennessee Titans. And like I said, they just continue to control the AFC South right now. Just talked about the Jaguars and the Texans a second ago, which those 2 teams alongside of the Titans are looking up to the Colts and saying, man, we got some ground to make up, especially Houston, who we projected a lot of people after winning the AFC South the previous 2 seasons to win it again. The Colts said, nah, it's their time. And you can honestly make the argument they should have won it 2 years ago if it wasn't for that arid drop in week 18 against the Texans that the Colts had in 2023. But the Colts, they're making a statement. Their defense looks nice. They're playing on one accord. Offense looks like one of the best in the league, and Daniel Jones is having a great season so far in these first 3 games. Let's continue to see things go forward. Like I always like to say, it's still very early in the season, but they've been one of the most impressive teams in the league so far, and the Colts got a dominant 41-20 win, moving on to a 3-0 record. This matchup between the Washington Commanders and the Las Vegas Raiders was really decided after the third quarter when the Commanders were up 34-10, but in this matchup, they won the game 41-24. Even amidst Jaden Daniels being hurt in this matchup, Marcus Mariota started his first game since the 2022 season when he was with the Atlanta Falcons, and he played solid football, completing 15 out of his 21 passing attempts for 207 pass yards and a touchdown. And I will say one thing, the rushing game for the Washington Commanders has continued to ascend, even with an Austin Eckler tearing his Achilles in week 2 against the Packers, them trading Brian Robinson to the 49ers before the season started. Jeremy McNichols and Corey Cross-Merritt, Chris Rodriguez, and even Marcus Mariota in this game, they all pitched in. Jeremy McNichols had an explosive 60-yard rushing touchdown in the game, and on the game overall, he had 4 carries for 78 rushing yards and a touchdown. Marcus Mariota also had 6 carries for 40 rushing yards and a touchdown too. Corey Cross-Merritt had a rushing touchdown as well. Just overall, a lot of balance from this team, and Luke McCaffrey in the receiving game had 3 receptions for 56 receiving yards and a touchdown, and Terry McLaurin was utilized way more than he was in the first 2 matchups, as he had 3 receptions for 74 receiving yards in this game. So just a lot of balance on this team. Defensively, the Commanders played well too, even though Geno Smith nearly threw for 300 passing yards, completing 19 out of his 29 passing attempts for 3 touchdowns as well. They were really able to dictate things, and a lot of the points that the Raiders had was throughout the second half when the game was decided. But I will say, receiving wise, Trey Tucker had a great game for Las Vegas, having 8 receptions for 145 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. Had a dynamic game, but besides that, they weren't able to get things really going. Brock Bowers is continuing to still deal with that little knee injury. He only had 4 carries for 38 receiving yards, and Jacoby Myers only had 3 receptions for 63 receiving yards. And like I continue to say, I know Chip Kelly said something about load management, they call it in the NBA, and that's what they're doing with Ashton Genty. And he did have more carries in this game, as he had 17 carries for 63 rushing yards and no touchdowns. But you got to continue to utilize him in as many ways as you can. He was a 6th overall pick. Use him in the receiving game as well too, guys. I mean, the Raiders are still trying to get things going more urgently because they're in a tough division in the AFC West with the Chargers, Broncos, and the Chiefs. But for the Commanders, they move on to a 2-1 record and got a great dub over Las Vegas. The Eagles winning in the fashion that they did against the Rams. They're 8 for 8 on drives in the red zone. They haven't lost since September last year, and they're 19-1 over the past 20 games. Yeah, they're looking dangerous. This game, a lot of people were looking forward to seeing a rematch from the NFC divisional round between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Los Angeles Rams. And similarly to that divisional round game, and also in the regular season last year, the Philadelphia Eagles won this game 33-26, coming back down from a 26-7 deficit in the game, blocking a field goal that the Rams could have won the game on and returning it for a touchdown. Just an absolute masterclass. And this Eagles offense was absolutely horrid in the first half, only having 17 passing yards. And in the second half, compared to that, Jalen Hurts ended up throwing 209 239 passing yards and having a really great game and great performance, accounting for 4 total touchdowns, completing 21 out of his 32 passing attempts for 226 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 touchdown in the running game on 9 carries for 40 rushing yards too. The Rams defense contained Saquon Barkley way better than they did in the previous 2 matches from last year, as Saquon Barkley had 460 rushing yards against the Rams in 2024. But overall, the Eagles going into this game, they were the only team in the NFL to not have a passing touchdown. Well, they said we can definitely drop back, and Jalen Hurts was able to do that. AJ Brown was utilized at a high level in this game, had 6 receptions for 109 receiving yards and a touchdown. Devontae Smith also added in a receiving touchdown on 8 receptions for 60 receiving yards, and Dallas Goedert himself had a receiving touchdown too. So a lot of balance from this offense, where a lot of people were questioning after the first 2 matchups, not getting anything really utilized in the passing game. They answered that call. And the Rams, I mean, besides Matthew Stafford throwing that first interception in the first half, and I know that he had some aired plays throughout the game, their offense wasn't necessarily bad at all. Devontae Adams had an explosive touchdown in that matchup too, as he had 3 receptions for 56 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. Kyron Williams had a receiving touchdown, and Puka Nacua, who continues to be the MVP for this offense, he had 11 receptions for 112 receiving yards too. So the Rams, I mean, they did enough to win the game. Like I said, they were up 26-7 in this game, but overall they got out executed, and the Philadelphia Eagles moved on to a 3-0 record. Now the Rams are 2-1, which is still positive and solid. And I would say this was probably the Eagles' biggest threat so far, but the Eagles have the Bucs in week 4, so arguably you can say the Bucs, who are also undefeated with a 3-0 record, especially after beating Philly last year in the regular season and beating Philly in the wild card round of the 2023 playoffs. That'll be an intriguing game. But now Sean McVay and his coaching team with the Los Angeles Rams is 1-6 against the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Eagles are continuing to look like one of the best teams in the NFL, winning in different ways. And it was a great win for them in week 3. And shout out to Jordan Davis on a big man touchdown, yes sir, to end the game. This game, you can argue that this was the most surprising outcome from NFL week 3, as the Carolina Panthers absolutely dusted the Atlanta Falcons, winning 30-0, getting their first win of the year and pushing the Atlanta Falcons to a 1-2 record. My goodness, the Falcons looked awful in this game. Michael Penix Jr. threw a pick 6, threw 2 interceptions on the game. Their offense was stalled and wasn't able to get anything going. And I think we should not overreact too much to Kirk Cousins being inserted in the game in the 4th quarter. The game was over at that point. But the Falcons, after getting a great week 2 win over the Minnesota Vikings on Sunday Night Football, they got blasted in this matchup. And Bryce Young looked great. He looked like the version of Bryce Young that we saw when he was reinserted into the starting lineup after Andy Dalton started last year. And he looked solid in this game, completing 16 out of his 24 passing attempts for 121 passing yards. But he also had a rushing touchdown too. And just overall, the offense looked way better than it did in the previous 2 weeks. Chuba Hubbard had 17 carries for 73 rushing yards. Rico Dowdle had 30 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Then Tedero McMillan had 3 receptions for 48 receiving yards in his game too, the young rookie. I just liked overall what they were able to do from a defensive perspective. I think that really just made things easy on their offense to make plays when needed to, not to do too much. And like I said, Bryce Young managing the game and having a good rushing touchdown, and overall getting the ball to his backs and Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle. But for the Falcons, that's not a great performance at all. I think that's when you just want to flush, especially after a week 2 win that they had. You want to flush that losing to the Carolina Panthers. It kind of reminded me, not exactly the same, of course, because it was a closer game in that matchup, but it kind of reminded me of week 18 last year when the Panthers essentially eliminated the Falcons from playoff contention, but the Panthers just destroyed them this time. And the Falcons, they have a game against the Commanders in week 4, so it's not going to get any easier. That's a game that you're going to look back later in the season and be like, man, we should have won that for sure. But the Panthers, they really impressed me in this matchup in this game. Showed a lot of fight after the first 2 weeks, really looking like the Panthers of old. This is a good matchup and a good win for them, and I'm encouraged from what I saw from the Panthers defense and from Bryce Young and their offense overall. After an underwhelming performance in week 2 against the Seattle Seahawks, the Pittsburgh Steelers were able to bounce back and rebound in this matchup against the New England Patriots, winning 21-14, advancing to a 2-1 record. And their defense certainly looked way improved than they did in the previous first 2 weeks against the Jets and against the Seahawks. This game, though, offensively, Aaron Rodgers was solid. He threw a pick, yes, but he completed 16 out of his 23 passing attempts, throwing for 139 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Not necessarily the traditional or vintage Aaron Rodgers performance, but still one that was able to help them win the game and do enough. And, you know, in the running game, Kenneth Gainwell had a rushing touchdown, Calvin Austin had a receiving touchdown, and DK Metcalf had a receiving touchdown too in this matchup. And their defense was able to force an interception from Drake May, who they forced to throw the ball a lot, as he threw the ball 37 times, completing 28 out of those 37 passing attempts for 268 passing yards and 2 touchdowns with that 1 pick. I will say Hunter Henry did have an impressive performance in its matchup, having 8 receptions for 90 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. This was a close game. The Steelers won by a touchdown, but I just believe that they're the superior team, even with a revitalized New England Patriots team under head coach Mike Vrabel, who's looked competitive in their first 2 weeks, getting their first win against the Dolphins last week in week 2, and then winning their first game in week 1 against the Raiders. But the Steelers won this game. They're the better team. Aaron Rodgers, like I said, he's going to be able to do enough for this team to, like I believe, have a 9-8 or 10-7 type of record and help the Steelers reach the playoffs. We'll see how things continue to trend throughout the season. I think the biggest takeaway from this game is that the Steelers defense was improved improved and responded from their uncharacteristic defensive performances from week 2 and week 1. But it was a great win for the Steelers, moving on to a 2-1 record. This was a week 3 matchup that was also a shocking outcome, as the Cleveland Browns got their first win of the season, defeating the Green Bay Packers, winning 13-10, moving to a 1-2 record, and now the Green Bay Packers having a 2-1 record. The game was 3-0 at halftime. It was really an ugly performance on both sides, but the Browns, they were able to make key plays, and their defense continued to hold things down. Really, if you look at it throughout the season, especially in week 1 more so, because in week 2 the Ravens absolutely put against the Browns, winning 41-17 in that matchup. But this game for the Browns, they were ultra competitive and won this game on a game-winning field goal. And Joe Flacco, he did enough. He managed the game, completed 21 out of his 36 passing attempts for 142 passing yards and no touchdowns and 1 interception. I think the biggest thing for the Browns, especially the past 2 weeks offensively, the addition of Quinshon Judkins finally being inserted after signing his contract, missing week 1 but playing the past 2 games. He's been great and a huge boost to this running game. In this matchup, he had 18 carries for 94 rushing yards, averaging 5.2 yards per carry and a rushing touchdown. From a receiving perspective, there was a lot of spreading the football out. No one really necessarily outshined anyone. David Njoku led the team with 5 receptions and 40 receiving yards. But like I said, the running game had a huge boost, and they were able to really cause fits for the Green Bay Packers, and ultimately the Browns were able to win this game. Jordan Love didn't look great in this game, and I don't think he's looked great at all throughout this year. He didn't look bad in the first 2 weeks, but I definitely don't think he's looked great in this game. He completed 18 out of 25 passing attempts for 183 passing yards, a touchdown, and an interception. I believe their receiving core, outside of Tucker Kraft, who had an explosive game against the Washington Commanders in week 2, it continues to be a low-key problem in terms of, I mean, it's never bad to have a receiver by committee. I mean, look what the Buffalo Bills are doing. But sometimes, I mean, they're just very one-dimensional in terms of them relying straight on Josh Jacobs to get stuff for them. And the Browns, they stopped the run at a high level. Josh Jacobs only had 16 carries for 30 rushing yards. I mean, come on, man. They weren't really able to be creative at all in the running game. Matthew Golden, he had a better game, especially compared to the past 2 weeks, having 4 receptions for 52 receiving yards. And Josh Jacobs had 44 receiving yards on 5 receptions. But this offense, I think it still needs a lot of improvement throughout this year, and their defense is continuing to be one of the best in the league. The Packers lost this game, but they still only allowed the Browns to 13 points, and I'm intrigued to see how the Packers respond in week 4 against the Cowboys, who have one of the worst defenses in the league. Oh my goodness, we're going to talk about them in a second. But this is a bad loss for them in Green Bay, and now they have the same record as the Lions. Right now they have the tiebreaker against the Lions, of course, too, but they'll have to play against them later in the year. But it's a bad loss for Green Bay. I mean, there's no other way to put it, but it's a great win and a first win for the Cleveland Browns in this 2025 NFL season. Week 3 certainly had a couple of blocked field goals returned for touchdowns, didn't it? They did in the Eagles and Rams game, and in this game between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Jets, they did. The only difference is that the Buccaneers were still able to win this game, winning the game 29-27, moving on to a 3-0 record. And the New York Jets remain one of the few winless teams in the league, having an 0-3 record. But the Jets, they did fight a lot in this game, I will say that, and they only lost by 2 points. But for the Bucs, man, I think their defense played great, and even though their offense stalled at certain times, they were still able to score when needed to. But I think in the second quarter, Jamel Dean having that pick 6 touchdown was huge and carried a lot of momentum for them, and they were able to get to Tyrod Taylor a lot, also force a strip sack in the first half as well. The Bucs continue to have one of the best defenses in the league. I know a lot of people don't like to talk about it. Todd Bowles being still one of the best coaches in the league, having a bend not break type of defense, being one of the best defensive masterminds I still believe in the NFL right now. And though offensively they were still solid, Baker Mayfield, he said it was kind of a personal game for him, as the Jets defensive coordinator was with the Panthers a couple of seasons ago that cut Baker, and Baker, he had a solid performance. I mean, he completed 19 out of his 29 passing attempts for 233 passing yards and a touchdown. In a passing touchdown, Bucky Irving, maybe not from a statistical standpoint, he doesn't look the greatest, as he had 25 carries for 66 rushing yards, but if you watch the game, man, Bucky Irving is special, man, in the running game and also as a pass catcher. In this game, receiving wise, he had 33 receiving yards. I think the biggest thing from this game, though, if you're a Bucs fan, that you're kind of holding your breath about, is Mike Evans leaving the game with a hamstring injury. Hopefully it's not too severe, but that sucks, man. Your Hall of Fame wide receiver who has had 1,000 receiving yards every single year of his career, and in this game he had a receiving touchdown 2 on 4 receptions for 33 receiving yards. Hopefully if he does have to miss time, it's not too long, maybe similar to last year, but you don't want it to be too severe. But I will say, though, for the Bucs, I believe they might arguably already have their wide receiver 1 in Emeka Egbuka, who had 6 receptions for 85 receiving yards in this game, including a special one-handed reception in this game. It was tough. I liked it. This Bucs team has a lot of balance. Sterling Shepard also had 4 receptions for 80 receiving yards too. Mind you, Chris Godwin still hasn't played yet for this team, and he's going to be returning soon, so he'll be a huge boost as well too. Just a lot of weapons galore on this offense, and defensively the Bucs were able to hold things down. For the Jets, though, I don't think they played too bad. I mean, Tyrod Taylor, he's a backup quarterback. He didn't play horrible in this game, besides the interception and the strip sack that he allowed. He completed 26 out of 36 passing attempts for 197 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, in that pick. Also had 48 rushing yards on 8 carries in this game. The rushing game, though, outside of Tyrod Taylor, was really inept. Braylon Allen and Breece Hall only combined for 51 rushing yards on 15 carries. Garrett Wilson, though, he did have a great game individually, having 10 receptions for 84 receiving yards and a touchdown too. But regardless of that, and regardless of the respectable losses that the Jets had in this game against the Bucs and in week 1 against the Steelers, they got blown out in week 2, and right now they're still one of the remaining teams without a win in the NFL. But the Bucs, they're one of the teams in the league that has a 3-0 record right now, and they're going to move on to week 4 in an intriguing matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles, and I'm looking forward to that for sure. To the AFC West now, where the Los Angeles Chargers were able to get a huge divisional win, their 3rd divisional win already of the season after beating the Chiefs in week 1, the Raiders week 2, and now the Broncos in week 3, defeating the Broncos 23-20 in this game, moving on to a 3-0 record, and now the Broncos are 1-2. This offense for Los Angeles is very explosive, and I know that Jim Harbaugh, he has the run first type of mentality, but he's been letting things fly with Justin Herbert in the first few weeks in these first 3 games. And in this game, he nearly dropped back 50 times, completing 28 out of his 47 passing attempts for 300 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick, but they were balanced. In the rushing game, Amarion Hampton, he had 19 carries for 70 rushing yards and a touchdown. Then receiving wise, Quentin Johnson continues to have a great stretch this season, as he's already had 3 receiving touchdowns in 3 games this year, and he had 6 receptions for 89 receiving yards in this game. Keenan Allen also got a receiving touchdown in this game too, on 7 receptions for 65 receiving yards, and Amarion Hampton was utilized at a high level in the receiving game too, having 6 receptions for 59 receiving yards. And then other players like Aronde Gadsden II had 5 receptions for 46 receiving yards, and Ladd McConkey had 4 receptions for 41 receiving yards too. This offense is spreading the ball out, and Justin Herbert is continuing to play at a high level, and defensively they're playing at a high level too. Bo Nix only had 153 passing yards in this game for 1 touchdown, and J.K. Dobbins, he played solid, having 11 carries for 83 rushing yards and a touchdown. Cortland Sutton was hooping in this game too, having 6 receptions for 118 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. But the Chargers, they were still able to clutch this game out and win, and they're 3-0 right now, first in the AFC West. Like I said in the previous video, in my NFL Power Rankings video and the Week 2 recap, this team is trying to break the streak of the Kansas City Chiefs winning 10 consecutive AFC West titles in their division, and the Chargers looking nice right now and got a great win over their divisional rival in the Denver Broncos. Even amidst Najee Harris tearing his Achilles and being out for the season, they were still able to get this dub for him. In week 2, the Seahawks defeated the Steelers, winning 31-17 in that matchup, and in this game they blew out the Saints, winning 44-13, moving on to a 2-1 record. And the Seahawks, they continue to fly under the radar, but I believe that really low-key every team in the NFC West, but especially the Seahawks, who had a 10-7 record last year but nearly missed the playoffs because of a tiebreaker with the Rams, they have a shot to make it again this year. And Sam Darnold, he looked efficient in this matchup. They looked so well and dominated by so much that later in the 4th quarter, Drew Lock was able to come into the game and just hold things down, because their starters and their defense overall and the Seahawks overall was able to hold things down. Sam Darnold completed 14 out of his 18 passing attempts for 218 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Kenneth Walker had 2 rushing touchdowns. Receiving wise, Jackson Smith and Jigba continues to dominate, as he had 5 receptions for 96 receiving yards and a touchdown. Only 4 shy of 100 receiving yards in this game, but in the first 2 matchups against the 49ers and the Steelers, Jackson Smith and Jigba had 100 receiving yards too, so he's continuing to improve, and definitely I think undisputedly is their wide receiver 1. Torrey Horton had a receiving touchdown in this game too, and defensively the Seahawks dominated. Like I said, Darion Kendrick had an interception in this matchup. Torrey Horton also had a punt and return touchdown, and this team just played great. And for the Saints, like I continue to say, it's going to be a long season for them. They're also a winless team, moving on to an 0-3 record. Spencer Rattler, I think he hasn't played bad in the first 2 games, and even this one to an extent. Stat-wise, at least he didn't play terrible, completing 29 out of his 39 passing attempts, throwing for 218 passing yards, 1 touchdown and 1 pick. But this team, like I said, they're just not great, and they do have a couple of weapons on this team. Chris Olave, Juwan Johnson, Rashid Shaheed, and Jack Stoll even had a receiving touchdown in this game as well. But I just think that this team doesn't necessarily have the answer, not only from the quarterback position, but just overall. There's a lot of holes on this team, and the Seahawks, they dominated at a high level in this matchup, moving on to a 2-1 record. The Dallas Cowboys defense is awful. I think even from a statistics standpoint, maybe there's some worse defenses in the league right now, but I think it's the worst. The Bears dominated in this game, winning 31-14, getting their first win of the year. And Caleb Williams, I think it's safe to say he had his best game of his career so far in his first 2 seasons, completing 19 out of his 28 passing attempts for 298 passing yards and 4 passing touchdowns. I think once we saw that bomb to Rome Odunze after he beat Trayvon Diggs in man-to-man coverage, I knew it was going to be a long day for the Dallas Cowboys. And like I said, their team just overall dominated. Look at their skill players. Luther Burden, in his 3rd game of his NFL career, had 3 receptions for 101 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. Rome Odunze had 3 receptions for 62 receiving yards and a touchdown. DeAndre Swift had 3 receptions for 45 receiving yards, adding on to his 33 rushing yards. And then DJ Moore and Cole Kmet, both of them had receiving touchdowns in this game too. So So they just overall dominated, man. I mean, Dallas's offense is going to be one of the best in the league, but it seems like right now their strategy is going to have to be to outscore teams because their defense is just absolutely atrocious. Kyer Elam, Trayvon Diggs, Donovan Wilson. They're still missing Deron Bland, so I'll cut them some slack there though. But if you're Jerry Jones and the Cowboys front office, you have to make some moves. Try to sign a Stephon Gilmore. Wait for Deron Bland to potentially be back in week 4. They drafted Siobhan Revel out of East Carolina in the 3rd round, who would have been a first-round corner if he didn't tear his ACL. DeMarvio Overshown is still hurt too. But right now, man, the Cowboys, they're just terrible on defense. And then an insult to injury with this game is CD Lamb suffering an ankle injury. And it looked like he tried to come back in the game, but he just wasn't able to get things going. But he just wasn't able to really power through it. And we'll see what his status is. Man, that was just an awful game from the Cowboys and the Bears. They looked encouraging, getting their first win in the Ben Johnson era over Dallas after 2 bad losses, especially against the Detroit Lions in week 2, but losing the league in week 1 against the Vikings. They were able to respond at a high level, playing an overall great game offensively and also defensively as well too. Getting a fumble on the Cowboys' first drive from Tyree Stevenson, essentially stealing the ball away, then forcing 2 interceptions from Dak Prescott, one from a tip ball that George Pickens dropped, and then in the end zone when Dallas was trying to score a touchdown in the 4th quarter. The Bears looked nice, man. The Bears looked better, and Caleb Williams looked solid in his performance, and you saw shades of why Caleb Williams was the first overall pick in the 2024 NFL draft. The Cowboys, they have a lot of work to do, but the Bears, they got a great dub in their first win of the 2025 NFL season. This week had a lot of games decided by field goals being made or blocked or missed, and the San Francisco 49ers were able to get a game-winning field goal in this matchup against the Cardinals, winning 16-15, moving on to a 3-0 record, and the Cardinals are now 2-1. I think the 49ers especially wanted this one bad after the Cardinals swept the 49ers in the 2024 NFL season, and without Brock Purdy playing, without George Kittle playing, the 49ers overall had a bend not break type of game offensively and defensively in this matchup. Mac Jones, after having a great performance in week 2 against the Saints, was a little bit of up and down, but overall I think he still played a solid game, completing 27 out of his 41 passing attempts for 284 passing yards, 1 touchdown and 1 pick. Christian McCaffrey had 17 carries for 52 rushing yards. In the receiving game though, he dominated way more, having 88 receiving yards alongside of a Ricky Pearsall, who has really emerged so far in the 2025 NFL season, stepping in when players like Brandon Ayuk is still recovering from his knee injury last year after trading Deebo Samuel, and Juwan Jennings not playing in this game. Ricky Pearsall had 8 receptions for 117 receiving yards in this matchup. Just really, if you're a 49ers game, you have to be pleased with what your second-year wide receiver has done from an overall production standpoint, especially after the adversity and things that happened to him last year after being shot and stuff like that in 2024. Shout out to him for sure. Nick Bosa, though, did suffer a season-ending torn ACL in this matchup against the Cardinals, and you're going to ask yourself, how ravished and deficient does that make the 49ers defense going forward without your best defensive player throughout the rest of the year, especially from a pass rushing standpoint? So that sucks seeing not only James Conner get hurt in this game, but also Nick Bosa, both of them being out for this 2025 NFL season after week 3. From the Cardinals though, man, I believe that this offense is just the definition of potential, because there is opportunities for Marvin Harrison Jr. to make a play, and overall he didn't. He only had 3 receptions for 44 receiving yards in this matchup. Trey McBride did have a receiving touchdown, an impressive one I might add, having 4 receptions for 53 receiving yards too. But overall in this game though, from a running perspective, weren't really able to get too many great things going. Trey Benson had 10 carries for 42 rushing yards. Kyler Murray, who had that 1 passing touchdown to Trey McBride on 159 passing yards, completing 22 out of his 35 passing attempts, only had 6 carries for 37 rushing yards in the running game too. So like I said, this is an overall defensive battle. Both offenses kind of struggled to score, but the 49ers were able to persevere and win this game, moving on to a 3-0 record, and now the Cardinals are 2-1. But like I said about the Seahawks earlier, the Cardinals, the 49ers, and the Rams too, who are now also 2-1 like the Cardinals, all of those teams, I think they have a great shot to win this NFC West, and I think that this might be one of the most competitive divisions in the NFL. The 49ers, they now have a 3-0 record and are still holding things down without their franchise quarterback in Brock Purdy and one of the best tight ends in the league in George Kittle, who's also injured.
With Jackson Dart now starting, a lot of what I said in this, I mean, you can take some void to it, but yeah, it's interesting. But anyways, let's go on and get into the Chiefs and Giants recap. Yes, sir.
So I talked about it a little bit in the intro. I still remain largely unimpressed with what the Chiefs were able to do in this matchup against the Giants, but they won 22-9, getting their first win of the season and avoiding an 0-3 record. But besides some passes to Tyquan Thornton, who I think has really stepped up in his role in this offense, as he had 5 receptions for 71 receiving yards and a touchdown, and Patrick Mahomes still doing Patrick Mahomes things, I'm still not impressed by this offense at all, man. But still, from a running game perspective, Kareem Hunt, he was able to score a rushing touchdown. But besides Isaiah Pacheco, who, okay, he averaged 4.5 yards per carry, having having 10 carries for 45 rushing yards. Kareem Hunt with that rushing touchdown. But overall, the Chiefs only had 105 rushing yards, which I guess isn't terrible, but it still isn't great. And it came on the backs of 5 different accumulating for those yards with Pacheco, Kareem Hunt, Brashard Smith, Nico Remigio, and Patrick Mahomes. And Mahomes, passing-wise, I mean, he played solid. I guess he completed 22 out of his 37 passing attempts for 224 passing yards and that touchdown to Tyquan Thornton. But they're still missing their weapons like a Rashid Rice, who won't return until week 7 after he serves his 6-game suspension. They're still missing Xavier Worthy, who dislocated his shoulder in week 1 against the Chargers. Travis Kelce only had 4 receptions for 26 receiving yards. I will say, though, there was an odd play in the first half where Patrick Mahomes kept pump faking and he just missed Travis Kelce. That was odd too, but I'm not impressed by this team. And I believe right now in the AFC West, the Chargers, it's their division to win right now, as they've started off 3-0 and really are playing really good football. And, you know, a lot of people talk about, you know, the refs or how the Chiefs have felt inevitable throughout still finding ways to win and stuff like that too. I think this year you're seeing a lot of the league catch up to them, and that the talent isn't as wide of a gap as we thought it has been just throughout teams in the league in general, but with the Chiefs as well too, because right now it's obvious to say that they lack explosive talent and the skill player talent right now at the recording of this video and going into week 4. And from the other end, I mean, when you have Russell Wilson playing, honestly, what we call it incompetent football, throwing 2 bad interceptions, completing 18 out of his 32 passing attempts for only 160 passing yards, really the receiving game wasn't able to get going at all. Their leading receiver was Cam Scatterbu, their running back, who had 6 receptions for 61 receiving yards and had that rushing touchdown, their only lone touchdown of the game. Malik Neighbors only having 2 receptions for 13 receiving yards. I just think that they lack strategy, and I think that something that is inevitable for the Giants is them starting Jackson Dart soon. But, and it's not great. It's not looking great for really either of these teams, but especially the Giants. They need some creativity, but for the Chiefs, they also need some creativity, because I'm still not impressed from what I've seen from them. But overall, they were able to get their first win of the year. That's the most important thing. But they need to wake up, because they're going to be playing the Baltimore Ravens in week 4 and then the Detroit Lions in week 5. So things are not going to get easier for the Kansas City Chiefs, but we'll see. I think that it's reasonable to say this is the most adversity that we've seen the Chiefs have in the Patrick Mahomes era so far.
The final matchup that took place for NFL Week 3 was the game between the Detroit Lions and the Baltimore Ravens. And the final score was 38-30, but really it was 38-24. Ravens had a garbage time touchdown. The Lions, in all actuality, out-physicaled the Ravens in this game. And it's a crazy thing, because a couple of seasons ago, we all know the Ravens dominated the Lions, winning 38-6. That was before Derrick Henry was there too as well. This is a totally different story. I mean, if you look at the time of possession, the Lions had the ball for nearly 20 minutes in the first half. For the game, they had the ball 33 minutes. The Lions defense was absolutely devastating to Lamar Jackson, had him in shambles, was able to keep him in the pocket and not allowing him to scramble. Lamar was sacked 7 times. And the Lions are now 12-2 in primetime games since 2021. I mean, overall, they showed why they have one of the best offensive lines in the league and one of the best offenses in the league last year. And in between the past 2 games, they scored a total of 90 points after scoring 52 in week 2 and 38 in this game against Baltimore. And it was an overall great offensive performance, and they played overall complementary football offensively and defensively. Look at the stat line from Jared Goff, completing 20 out of his 28 passing attempts, throwing for 202 passing yards and 1 touchdown. David Montgomery absolutely sliced through this Baltimore Ravens defense, having 12 carries for 151 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns, averaging 12.6 yards per tote. And then Jahmyr Gibbs also had 22 carries for 67 rushing yards and had 2 rushing touchdowns as well himself. And Amon-Ra St. Brown dominating the receiving game, having 7 receptions for 77 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. Just a lot of balance. That's the biggest thing that we learned from this game from the Detroit Lions offense. And after that first dud of a matchup between Green Bay, after they lost that game in week 1, they've shown the past couple of weeks that this is the Detroit Lions that we come to know and love the past couple of years. John Morton is really getting his flow and rhythm as offensive coordinator for the Lions. And for the Ravens offense, man, it's been a struggle in this game, especially with Derrick Henry. From a fumble perspective, he's had 3 fumbles already in 3 games this year. 1 in the 4th quarter of this game, and also 1 in the 4th quarter, as we all know, in that collapse as the Ravens blew that 15-point lead in week 1 against the Buffalo Bills. The Ravens, they got to get right. They do play against the Chiefs next week, who we all know haven't looked the best throughout this year, and they just got their first win. But in that matchup next week, whoever loses that game, they'll have a 1-3 record, and that's crazy to say about the Chiefs and the Ravens. But Lamar Jackson, I mean, besides getting sacked 7 times, the Ravens offensive line, they got dominated by the defensive line. They got beat up in the trenches. Like, that's a fact. But Lamar Jackson, I guess from a stats perspective, he didn't play terrible. Completed 21 at his 27 passing attempts for 288 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns. But the Lions, like I said, they contained Lamar Jackson from a running standpoint, only having 7 carries for 35 rushing yards. And they contained Derrick Henry too, as he only had 12 carries for 50 rushing yards and only had that first rushing touchdown of the game for the Ravens. Mark Andrews had 6 receptions for 91 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns, and Rashad Bateman had 5 receptions for 63 receiving yards and a touchdown too. They were able to really contain Zay Flowers, only having 2 receptions for 13 receiving yards yards, and Lamar Jackson had to spread it out to other players like Justice Hill, Devontae Walker, Charlie Kolar, and DeAndre Hopkins, after scoring receiving touchdown in the first 2 games, really didn't really have too much of an impact in this game, as he only had 1 reception for 13 receiving yards. Yeah, the Lions, they just looked like the better and superior team in this game, and I'm not gonna lie, I picked the Ravens to win this game, and I thought they were gonna dominate, and the Lions said, nah, it's our time, and we're reminding teams of how physical of a football team that we are and how complete of a football team that they are. The Detroit Lions got an impressive week 3 win, advancing to a 2-1 record, and now the Baltimore Ravens are 1-2, and next week they'll be trying to avoid going 1-3. So what did we learn from NFL week 3? It's still an ebb and flow. A lot of teams are still trying to circulate things together, and what we've seen from, some continuing things that we thought, like I just talked about with the Ravens, the Chiefs, stuff like that, they're still trying to figure things out, whether it's from an injury perspective, with the Chiefs still missing weapons, or the Ravens, missing a player like an Isaiah Likely, or missing on a defensive line. Nandi Madubuike, who is arguably one of the best defensive tackles in the league, no one's going to feel bad for you. So it's an ebb and flow type of thing, and it's about adjustments. Everyone is dealing with the war of attrition. Everyone does every single season in the NFL and all sports, and NBA as well too, but particularly in the NFL, when the game is so violent, so harsh. Cowboys are dealing with a lot of injuries. CeeDee Lamb, Tyler Booker. They had Deron Bland coming back too, but I mean, no one feels bad for you. Texans have some injuries too. Joe Mixon is still out, and they still have an 0-3 record. Teams are still going to be able to find ways to win. The best teams will, at least, and the teams that don't have as much mental toughness or the willpower or have the greatest game plans from an execution standpoint will not win. Only the strongest survive, and we've seen teams like the Eagles move to a 3-0 record. Looking forward to their matchup against Tampa Bay, who also has a 3-0 record as well too. The Packers and Cowboys game, that's going to be an intriguing game. The reunion of Micah Parsons returning to Dallas. Jerry Jones already said that he's not going to have a tribute for Micah, so we'll see how that goes. I think the game will either go 1 or 2 ways. Either the Packers will dominate or the Cowboys will surprise them and win. I don't know about how that game will go, but just a lot to talk about. The Chargers, they're arguably, if you think them or the Bills, are the best team in the AFC. Nick Bosa being out for the season for the 49ers, that sucks. The Colts dominating with Daniel Jones. I mean, there's just a lot of intriguing storylines, guys, and this is why we love NFL football. It's still week 3, like I like to say continuously. You're not gonna know how the whole season is really going or have a great viewpoint on it until week 7, 8, 9, and 10, but we're starting to see teams play great football, and obviously the teams who are continuing to winless, and the teams that go 0-4 next week, I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna start looking bleak, but anything is possible. But I know one team that needs to win next week is the Texans against the Titans, because especially all the preseason expectations that we have for that team. But man, football is beautiful, and we're continuing to get more and more of it. Looking forward to these games in NFL week 4, and also stay tuned for my power rankings video that's coming tomorrow as well too, where we'll have a fresh list going into NFL week 4. But with that being said though, guys, let me know what you learned particularly from NFL week 3 and what your biggest expectations are going into week 4. Like I said, stay tuned for my power rankings video coming soon as well. But yeah, this football season is going great, it's going beautiful, and continue to stay tuned for more content. But with that being said, make sure that you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and X at SwaggyRuss, and on TikTok at SwaggyRuss2 for shorts, reels, content, all things to that nature. We're almost at 2,000 subscribers. That's truly a blessing. All glory to God for real. And like I said, stay tuned for more. And we're going to start doing also an NBA season preview series for the top contenders in the league as the season starts next month, so stay tuned for that as well. But yeah, y'all keep being blessed. Like I said, keep Jesus Christ at the center of your lives always. Allow him to unite us, because if you live in the U.S., we know that this country has been divided recently, really the world as a whole, and we all need Jesus. Ultimately, he's going to be the one that brings us together, and he's the way, the truth, and the life. So y'all just keep being blessed, guys, always. Love you. Know that you matter and have great purpose. Y'all have a good one. Peace.